So when it comes to liquid coating versus powder coating, we've talked about some of the technical aspects of how they're different in the past, but we still get a lot of questions about why we prefer powder over liquid, or just inquiries about if we can liquid coat small projects, which we usually turn down. And I'm gonna cover why we do that, and why we still really prefer powder coating so much over liquid coating. One of the probably first or biggest questions that customers have is when they come in to get a project quoted for blasting and powder coating, and then they look at our color wall and they don't really like any of our stock colors, even though we have quite a few, and they want to specifically match a chip that they have or the side of their house. Maybe they're doing lawn furniture and they want to match a color on their house, and we don't have that direct match in powder coating. And we've talked about in the past, it's extremely expensive to get that direct match in powder, but liquid, we could just go down to the paint store and pick whatever color we want. So in liquid, there are more color options. The problem is there's still quite a bit of expense there, because if we're going to go down to the paint store and get a special color, can they do that? Yes. But you have to remember, we're probably going to have to buy a full gallon, and usually the projects that are coming in off the street don't require that much paint. So it's going to be, the material cost is going to be quite a bit, and since it's very specialized just to your project, we're going to have to charge you for that full gallon. And then to kind of layer on top of that, when we're going to go do a liquid coating job, we're going to use really good products that are going to provide really good corrosion protection and hold up well over a long period of time. So that's going to differ from maybe going and getting a can of spray paint from the hardware store, where you're probably looking at less than $5, compared to we could be $75 to $150 again. And so now, to put that into perspective, let's say someone brings in a piece of lawn furniture. They don't like any of our stock colors that we have for powder coating, so they ask if we can liquid coat it, which we usually politely say no. But the reason for that is, yes, we can go get that exact match that you want, but now we're talking about could be $150 a gallon paint, and we only charge $125 to blast and powder coat a chair complete. So we're talking about that the material cost could, now I'm taking an extreme as an example, but the material cost for your small project could be more, just the material could cost more than us to do blast and powder coat complete done, where that's only $125, right? So that's one of the big reasons that we usually try to steer people away from liquid coating when we're talking about really small projects. When the projects get bigger, where we're going to be able to do the same project for multiple days or a full week, then it starts to make a little more sense to go liquid coating if that's what the spec requires, or for whatever reason powder coating doesn't seem like a good option. But you really need to be on, for our particular setup, we need to kind of be on the larger scale for that to start to make sense. Another issue that comes up a lot with powder coating is that we're curing in an oven, so everything has to be metal. And we have customers that have, fully assembled parts and pieces. Could be lawn furniture, could be other things, could be pieces off of car restoration, and they don't want to do the full disassembly. They don't want to take the time to remove all the non-metal parts, and so that eliminates powder coating as an option because it couldn't go in the oven. So then they ask if we can liquid coat it, and again, we usually politely decline. Just because we're going to go do liquid coating, that doesn't mean that you cannot disassemble it. We're not. The reason why we want you to disassemble it so we can do a really good full job of blasting and coating the part. If it's not disassembled, we can't do that. So we're not going to be able to do a very good job. You have to remember, in liquid coating, it's really hard to get in all the nooks and crannies, because we don't spray with electrostatic paints. So powder coating, we're using electrostatics. We can suck into a lot of hard to reach areas and get back in the corners and things. Liquid coating, we can't. So if it's not disassembled, we're going to have even a harder job of getting in all the hard to reach places. And so then that means that we're going to do a worse job. And then in terms of non-metal pieces, if we're going to blast it first, that all the plastic parts or anything that's not metal still needs to come off because it's going to get ruined in the blast process. A lot of customers just like the idea of liquid coating because they feel like that they can do that themselves. They're familiar with it. They could touch up the parts themselves, and sometimes they'll push us really hard to give them a quote for liquid coating a set of rims or something, and then I'll quote it and it's really expensive, and then they get really frustrated and like, well, I could do this myself for a lot cheaper. And my answer to that is yes, I know you could. I know you could go to the hardware store and get really cheap paint and do it yourself. And so if that's what you want to do, please go do that. We want to blast and powder coat typically for you. We think that's going to be a better job. And if we're going to do liquid coating, we want it to be a really good job as well. So we're going to take our time. We're going to get the right materials. Those are going to cost way more than what you can get at the hardware store. And we're not going to do it with a can of spray paint. So we're going to have equipment that we have to set up and get ready, and then spray your parts and then clean up. And when it comes to setting up and cleaning up, there's way more involved liquid coating than there is powder coating. When you're talking about really small projects, it takes way longer to set up and clean up than it does to actually spray the parts. And that's just because when you're getting ready to paint something, you have to run it through. If you're using a really good product, it's a multi-part paint, so you have to do all the mixing first and then quickly spray your parts. It doesn't take very long. And then now you have to clean everything up because you can't let the paint dry up in all the lines, because then you won't be able to use your equipment anymore. So now you have to run all the paint back out, run thinner through it. So you have a lot of just cleanup materials and rags and waste that you have to get rid of. There's costs associated with all that, but then the time itself. Whereas when we're powder coating, setup and cleanup is really minimal. It doesn't take that long. And we're also being able to do 5 projects the same color, so you can kind of split up that setup time across 5 jobs, so the cost goes down. So yes, we understand that you could paint it yourself. If you really want to do that and you want the cost to be extremely low, then we recommend that you do that. We could blast it for you. But if we're going to go ahead and try to do a coating, you want us to coat it, we're going to do the best job that we can so it holds up for a really long time. So there's some costs associated with that. In terms of the substrates that we can do, whenever we talk about powder coating, we always talk about the only thing that we're capable of doing is metal. There are some other substrates on the horizon for powder coating, but our equipment isn't quite there yet, so we're still just metal only. In terms of our liquid coating booth, we typically stay just fully metal there as well, just because of experience purposes. But yes, when you're talking about liquid coating and you're not having to cure in an oven, then yeah, could you paint plastics? Yes. Could you paint wood? Yes. Usually anything with wood we send over to our commercial and residential painting side. It's got more experience over there. Jay has more experience with that than I do. So either way, whichever we choose, liquid coating or powder coating, we're pretty much staying with a metal substrate. That's what we have the most experience with. We're going to be expanding that someday on the powder coating side to some other substrate capabilities, but typically we're going to, as of now, we're staying with metal parts. So almost always, to kind of sum it up, we're going to try to push powder just because we do more of that and it makes more sense for throughput for us. When you look at our teams, we have way more people in the powder coating shop than we do in our blast shop where we do the liquid coating at. That's because the more people that we have for powder coating, the more product we can push out, because we don't have to wait on dry times when it comes to powder coating. Once the parts come out of the oven and they're cool, we can ship them. So the more people that we have, the more parts that we can do, the faster stuff gets out the door. On the liquid coating side, we have to wait for dry times, and it's usually multiple coats. So that hinders how many people we can have, because eventually your bottleneck is just waiting for stuff to dry. So usually we stay with large industrial projects when it comes to liquid coating, and we have quite a few that we see over and over every few months, and we've got a pretty good routine and cadence of how all that flows together, so we can be prepping and packaging while we're waiting for other projects to dry. So to interject a really quick general public project for one piece of lawn furniture into that, it's really difficult and just doesn't make a lot of sense for us. And like I've kind of been the theme this whole video, it's way more costly for our customers. That's why we push powder coating so much. There are the occasion where liquid coating makes sense, and we'll definitely tell you when we want to do that. It's usually when we're just talking about priming, and it's usually related to the automotive industry with car bodies and things like that. Otherwise, we almost always push powder coating. If you have really big industrial type projects or trailers or heavy equipment like concrete trucks and dump trucks, then we're starting to think more liquid coating. But when you get into really small projects, really tiny pieces, we try to find a way to powder coat that because just the economics of it's much better for our customers.